The LA County Board of Supervisors voted to actually put a stop, an end to the eviction moratorium that was put in place in March of 2020. This was brought on because of the pandemic, and this was meant to be a protection for tenants. And so the tenants have had 34 months of protection up until this point. And so we knew heading into this that the Board of Supervisors had the option to extend this through June 2023. That's what we had all expected was going to happen, but they actually brought it to a stop. And so what does this mean for owners? A lot of owners, small mom and pop independent apartment owners, have the financial burden of not being able to collect rents and actually not being able to get possession of their properties. And so that is going to go away. So for some of the landlords, this is good news. This is going to bring much needed financial reprieve with this law. If you're a tenant, not to be super alarmed. What is happening right now, not just at the statewide level where we know there's statewide protection when it comes to rent control and other policies, but what we know and see in Southern California is more and more cities are taking the rent control rights into their own hands, and they're creating additional rent control laws that will further protect tenants. So if you're a tenant, there's going to be additional cities picking up their own rent controls. And what they're saying simply is that they're going to make it a little stricter and more tenant friendly than the state level currently has it. Along with the ending of the eviction moratorium, a lot of people do expect that evictions are going to start to increase come January and February, and I agree with that statement. But what a lot of people don't know is actually evictions have been on the rise. Some of the eviction attorneys out there are the busiest they've ever been, and some landlords have been able to get possession of their properties during this time. One of the biggest unknown ideas out there is that you're unable to get possession of your property for non-payment of rent, and that's incorrect. What we know is that there's a procedure in place for a landlord. If your tenant does not pay within the first 7 days of the month, and if they did not indicate to you that it was COVID related, then after 7 business days, you are able to issue a 3-day notice and start the eviction process. Now, this is something that you don't have to wait for till the end of the year. This is something that you could do now. If you're a tenant, what does that mean? If you're being impacted by COVID and you're unable to pay rent because of that, please know that the one way to hang your hat on that reason is within the first 7 days, you need to notify them. And this could be, I would suggest an email, but a text works, or a certain letter would give you that protection. So within the first 7 days, you're still gonna have the protection. That might go away after December 31st, but for now, we all know that if you're a landlord and you're trying to get eviction for non-payment of rent, you still have that right. If you're a tenant, there's a procedure and a way to have that protection if you so need it. So what will happen to properties after December 31st of 2022? After 2022 in LA County, there's 88 cities in LA County. And one of the things that we've been hearing from a lot of the landlords is my tenants aren't paying. They're saying that it's due to COVID, but they're still working and they're still not paying me. In January, we expect a lot of these landlords to want to get possession of their properties again. A lot of them, because they've had to shoulder the financial burden of this, a lot of them were struggling to make their payments. Some of them were close to foreclosure, and so they're gonna look forward to getting possession and moving with an eviction. It's not what they wanna do, but that's the only way that they could convert that unit into a paying unit. So we do expect, again, evictions to go up, but landlords, this is going to be something that they're going to look forward to. Another update that I would like to give you is a lot of people are saying, hey, let's get out of California, sell our multifamily properties because we have statewide rent control, and more cities are trying to even tighten that control, okay? That's what's really happening. But what we're seeing out there nationally is that more and more states outside of California are now moving towards rent control. And so in the past, where California was somewhat on its own, California and New York has always had rent control, we are seeing other states bringing this on, because where rents rose quickly in California, we know that this is going on in Arizona, it's going on in Idaho, and a lot of other spaces, because people have left California. They're able to afford, they're able to pay more for the real estate, and they're able to pay more in rent. And so rents nationally have actually been going up. And what we see happening is you're not going to be able to avoid statewide rent control nationally. You're going to have more and more states leaning in that direction. If you're an owner, and you were thinking about selling your real estate, you may want to try to go to a state that you believe will never pass it, but who knows the future? And if you're a buyer and you're looking to avoid buying in California because of statewide rent control, you might want to look at the states that you're considering your out-of-state investments in, because those states might be switching to that in the near future. Now, within Los Angeles County, I did say that there's 88 cities that make up Los Angeles County. Los Angeles City still is under a rent freeze. A lot of people get confused with LA City and LA County. And so what I want you to know is that the rent freeze is not LA County wide, it's very LA City wide. So if you're a owner, if you're a tenant, there is not supposed to be any rent increases through the end of 2023. So what happens to unpaid rent? Now this impacts both tenant and landlord. So if you're the landlord, the law says that any rent that was not paid during this time due to COVID is actually still due. And in fact, now it's going to be due in 2023. The law does allow the tenant to make partial payments towards that, but any unpaid rent is technically still due. The law was not meant to forgive the rent. If you're a tenant, know that you got to come up with a catch-up plan for that. There was a special program, tenant landlord relief program, where some tenants, some landlords got the benefit of receiving the unpaid balance. A lot of those funds have gone away. In the city of Long Beach, there was additional funds that were rolled out. But for the most part, if there's still unpaid rent, it's still due. I think a lot of landlords are thinking, I'll never get it, and that might be the case. And I think a lot of tenants are thinking, I'm not gonna pay it. Technically, what the law says is you're supposed to. And the last question, this is the most frequently asked question, is, can I raise the tenant's rent during this time? And the answer is yes. We did a video on how much can a landlord raise the rent. I suggest that you check that out. But just to summarize what we covered in that video is, with the exception of LA City, most other places in California will be allowed to raise the rents by 10%. So some cities might have a complete rent freeze. So check with your specific city, but for the most part, over 90% of the cities in California, those landlords in those areas are allowed to raise the rent by 10% on what the current rent is. So there you have it. Some quick tenant landlord updates. We're gonna come back with an update in January, and we're gonna keep you updated on what's going on. So please make sure to hit the subscribe button so that you could be notified on what new changes you need to be aware, whether you're a landlord or a tenant. Thank you for tuning in. That's all for me.